But types of generations, what we later call archetypes, tend to recur in the same order historically.
So it's almost like a curve.
Well, it's a wave when you look at their impact on history. It's a wave. But the actual generations, for instance, a generation that, sort of a heroic, history-making, changing generation, that takes the country through great wars and founds all kinds of new institutions. Typically is followed by a rather timid, risk-averse generation. They were the children during the war. They're careful not to upset, everything that was just created. Everyone just lost all these lives on their behalf. Woo,
Right.
And a good example of that would be the GI generation, the generation went through World War II, and the so-called silent generation, who were the kids of World War II and the Great Depression. And they were famous for, I don't want anything to go on my permanent record,
Right.
And they were very cautious. They were very risk averse. They all dressed in three-piece suits, in their early 20s. They played by the rules. And ultimately, they did very well economically. They got rewarded by the rules. This is a generation that's today in their late 70s and 80s, and they're all getting defined benefit pension plans. They're all doing really well.
Right.
And for a variety of reasons, they've done very well economically. But then you have other generations which have different locations in history and different characteristic orders. For instance, following a generation like boomers, which come of age during these periods that periodically happen in American history, these great awakenings, these great upheavals in the culture. When we reinvent art and literature and dynamics between races and ethnicities and just reinvent the culture. I mean, that's what happens during awakenings. And religion, typically too in our history. Those things happen during awakenings. And following these generations, you usually have a left alone generation. We call the nomad archetype. And this would be like Generation X. These are the left alone kids. These are the kids that no one had time for because everyone was finding themselves. You know what I mean? But Gen Xers.
By the way, as you say that, I'm thinking about Macaulay Culkin and
there we go, Home Alone.
Right? Yes.
But what's interesting and fascinating to us is that Gen Xers is not the first of this kind of generation. The Lost generation had that same. The Gilded generation. These are all kind of bad boy generations, just by their names. Lost, Gilded, Cavalier is another one going back into the 17th century. So those are fascinating archetypes, but they come in certain characteristic orders. Now that order is connected to, and not only in American history, but we think in many other countries around the world, is connected to another fascinating pattern, which many people have noticed, particularly in American history, and that is what's often called the long cycle in politics.
Right,
The fact that we have major civic crises that kind of redefine who we are as a nation, politically, institutionally, in very fundamental ways, about once every long human life.
Right.
About 80 or 90 years. I mean, you look at the War of Spanish Succession. It was probably the first great global war in European history, which happened, way back around 1700, and it was the Glorious Revolution in England. But it was a huge event in the colonies. And then about a lifetime after that, you had the American Revolution. Lifetime after that, Civil War. Lifetime after that, the Great Depression, World War II. And a lifetime after that, you're here with us today.
Here we are, yes.
So here we are.